Welcome, viewers. On behalf of Iravati Research and Communication Center, this is your host, Pratim Ranjan Bose. In this edition, we will discuss India-Canada diplomatic role and its impact on the economy, politics, etc. I have with me Professor Sreeradha Datta of Jindal School of International Affairs of the O.P. Jindal Global University. I also have Mr. Debasish, former Deputy Managing Director of Export-Import Bank of India, and Mr. Subhendu Moitra, an investment banker and founder director of Quas Advisors. The background is known to all. Speaking at the Canadian Parliament on September 18th, the Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau accused India for the death of the Khalistani terrorist Habib Singh Nijjar based on, quote, credible allegations, unquote. Nijjar was killed in June this year in the Canadian province of British Columbia. Canada had also expelled a senior Indian diplomat. The very use of the phrase credible allegation, which is almost sounds like an oxymoron, shows that Canada doesn't have to. Blaming another country, that too, the world's fifth largest economy, based on quote-unquote allegations, and issuing marching order to a senior diplomat is unheard of. Naturally, it escalated a full-fledged diplomatic war between the two G20 nations, which are friends or were friends. In a statement issued on September 19th, India's Ministry of External Affairs said, quote, such unsubstantiated allegations seek to shift the focus from Khalistani terrorists and extremists who have been provided shelter in Canada and continue to threaten India's sovereignty and territorial integrity, unquote. Considering the global war on terror, the Indian allegation is serious in bolds. More so because Canada is a developed country. India has also clarified that while it submitted proof behind its claim to the Canadian government, the Justin Trudeau government didn't share any information on its allegations. In response to Canada's outrageous actions, India has so far, 1, issued marching order to a senior Canadian diplomat, 2, asked Canada to downsize its diplomatic office in India to the level of Indian office in Canada, 3, suspended visa services in Canada, citing quote-unquote security threats. And 4, issued travel advisory on Canada. The G7, particularly US, UK, Australia, has neither sided with Canada nor did they distance from it. They cannot do that considering that UK and Australia have sizable Sikh population and part of the same bloc. Also, Canada is the closest ally of USA. This is an evolving story and probably the most critical development that will make or break India's image as an emerging power that's not ready to take things lying down. Before we enter a detailed discussion, a round of quick comments of 2 minutes each from the speakers. Over to you, Professor Datta, followed by Mr. Mallick and Subhendu.
Thank you, Pratim. First and foremost, I think that tempers are very frayed on both sides. So there has been, kind of jerky movements on both sides, which could have been avoided because it's not a new phenomenon. I think it's been years that we've been talking about it. The fact that this particular person in question has been, labeled as a terrorist by us. We very often have shared a lot of information with the Canadian government, so it's not that they're not in the know of it. But we have a long-standing relationship with Canada, and the education side, there are of course others on the panel who will talk about the economic and commerce. So I'm just saying that these situations are evolving. These issues are known; they're not unknown. But a simple. I mean, it's a complex issue really. But to say on credible, and we've been asking for evidence. I think we are aware of that. The government of India has been asking for evidence for them to come to this conclusion. So I think there has to be a kind of a step back on both sides and ensure, firstly, you kind of cool down and discuss this in a more general manner without both of us trying to hike the bar. Really, I think first and foremost that has to be done. This is an ongoing issue between India and Canada. It's not a new issue, but we would have to find a way to deal with it. And I quite agree with you that India is not going to be accused of something as horrendous as this and take it lying down. So I think we'll have to address that very strongly.
Mr. Mallick. Mr. Mallick, over to you.
Two important takeaways from what Madam had to say. First, tempers are frayed. Second, cooling down is required. Now, along with these tempers are frayed, I would also like to add another very important thing, which is perception is getting increasingly negative and fearful. Now, if you really combine the three things together, you are talking in terms of a cocktail which increasingly does not look very encouraging so far as the economic emergence is concerned and so far as the political or rather the social alignment is concerned. We are today in a situation where Canada is the second most important destination for not only Indian diaspora, but Indian business, Indian student, Indian funds, Indian investments, etc. in North America. It's only after US. And if you really look at it, it's perhaps the second largest in the entire American continent. That is including the economies of Brazil, Argentina, and all other large economies of South America. Now, on the one hand, you have a situation of a huge market, sophisticated market, which essentially enables entry of your famed services sector, because Indian services sector are no longer in the lower key. They are actually value-added services being provided. So you require matured market, you require matured economy, and Canada is one such economy and one such market which provides access to sophisticated Indian services sector. So that is one important thing. The other extremely important thing is that Canada has a huge amount of resources, especially energy resources. Perhaps it is one of the largest energy producers and energy resource holders of the world. Starting from shale oil to so many other things, it has almost a huge gamut all across the globe of resources available with it. Now, India actually has a need for such resources. India has entered into various important things, or various important decisions to get it. In fact, today morning, I was quite unhappy to see that Mr. Sajjan Jindal and his group has called off, or rather slowed down, a discussion which was going on regarding acquisition of a particular coal interest in Canada. Now, coking coal, Canada is an important player. Coking coal is something which India really does not have much. Though our coal production is very high, but coking coal is not very high. So we require coking coal supply from all across the globe. Canada will import supply, and that is getting into a doubtful zone. You similarly have a lot of other things, but most importantly, I would say the large amount of long-term investments which has come into the infrastructure sector, the large number of students and Indian people, Indian migrants who are already there, settled and doing well, the huge amount of trade relations and trade potential and investment agreements which are there, does not really make it a very good thing that today we are in a position where we are facing problems with this type of logjam situation.
Yeah, actually, just taking from what we're discussing, I absolutely agree. It's basically a knee-jerk reaction from both the parties, which is avoidable because of the fact that we are both a democratic country. So and maybe the issues are with the particular persons or a group of persons, not with the countries or on a long-term basis. So we need to cool down a bit because if you look at the as Mr. Mallick was saying, the trade is something around 11.6 billion dollars, which may not be something, of course, is very important, but at the same time, you can still manage with that. It doesn't affect us if one trade partner
It's
has some issues,
small.
and we
It's
can go ahead and
small. It's small.
small, it's small. So, but there's a lot of opportunity. But main part which is there for both of us is that the investments, as you were saying, the infrastructure investment. If you see especially the pension funds, they have invested something around $55 billion in the form of Canada Pension Fund, Roadies Pension Fund, and they have invested in the infrastructure. And let me tell you, it's not a charitable investment as such. These investments are all their requirement also. India is one of those stable markets today in the world who gives a regular return in the infrastructure, very assured return for a long period of time, which the pension funds of the Canada is requires, which is not available so easily across the world at this moment because of the economic situation of the other countries. So it's an opportunity for them. At the same time, it is required for our economy also, especially for the roads, for our huge infrastructure investment which is going ahead. So it is for us to work together and ensure that these kind of things which is going on doesn't affect our overall long-term investment and other scenario and our collaboration. That's my initial take on this particular
Right, right. Thank you so much. We had a good overview on the gamut of issues before us. Now let me come to Professor Datta. There are many angles to this development. India resisting the high-handed approach of a developed country. Developed world raise fingers at the emerging world for various issues, including terror. But here is a case where one country is giving shelter to terrorists, allegedly, of another country in the garb of liberalism and freedom of speech. Last but not the least, this incident may prove that foreign nations can use Indian diaspora against India. Your opinion, please.
When you asked me initially, I was actually going over this particular aspect. As a student of political science, we've often, studied diaspora as a part and a concept of studying international relations and bilateral relations. And we've, for most often than not, highlighted the positive aspects because we've seen what the Indian diaspora has done for India. I mean, it's outstanding, the contribution. But in this particular case, the negative ramification has been there for a while. But now there's so much more. In fact, I was just looking at some couple of news that's been emerging that there is now kind of a hate crime kind of a situation against Indian Canadians residing there. Students are complaining about the fear they're living in. I mean, this is so not acceptable. I mean, it's kind of leading to a situation which I think is going to roll on to something very unmanageable. And I again would think that both the governments need to sit together to,
In fact, one of those Khalistani elements in Canada has issued a warning to the non-Sikh community to leave Canada or something like that.
Exactly. And we know not only do we have a huge Indians who become Canadian residents or PR, but there's a huge student community. And every year that numbers are only increasing. And the kind of fear they're living in, we've been seeing this being flashed over the media. It's something which, of course, as I said, there are two Commonwealth countries. We've had a very good visit recently in the G20 platform. And it is in that backdrop we are thinking that how is this acceptable by both the governments. I do agree there's a point, like we think they are terrorists, and I think there's an issue also vis-a-vis Bangladesh where they've been didn't want to kind of extradite some particular they felt was not a terrorist or whatever. But I'm saying under those circumstances where, as I'm saying, India has clear clarity about what the state of issue is in terms of some individuals, some groups who are functioning there. We've seen the kind of political, noises they've made. We've retorted to them. Despite that, this particular, of course, again, when this particular murder happened, they as yet I don't think have any evidence. They've not been able to find out anything beyond that. So the three people that they say were involved, India's been asking for some evidence again, which they've not they failed to deliver. So under the circumstances, I think it's time both the governments understand that, this is a relationship that you're not going to let go. So the earlier we compromise or we negotiate, we discuss, because in international relations and in difficult bilateral times also, I think discussion is most important, because the spillover of what is happening within Canada itself is going to be a problem for the Canadian government. I mean, forget us also. And I don't want this situation to, roll into something which none of them have, accounted for or
Go out
calculated.
of hand.
Yes, absolutely. It looks like that. It's looking very, very scary just now.
Right. I'll come back to you. I have a pinpointed question to you. It is about, as you say, that they are considering some people that is not terrorist or whatever. Now that means that an interference into the domestic sovereignty of another country, the right to take decision of another country. There may be aberrations, there may be overlaps. I do agree, but don't you think that the world has to come to a system? Because just think of a reverse situation, that there is a person from a developed world who is declared fugitive and we are giving him shelter. Can we afford to do that? Can any emerging nation do that? So this is a very critical question. I think the world has to find an answer, that what is the right way approach to do that. I mean, let's not just keep fighting ourselves. Let me go to Mr. Mallick again. Mr. Mallick, you have hit the right chords about the resource-rich nature of Canada, and it's very surprising that India, which is a fuel guzzler, and it will remain a fuel guzzler given that it is growing at the fastest pace, barely has a trade relation. As in 2022 calendar, as per ITC trade map, Canada contributed only 0.5% of Indian imports and 0.9% of Indian exports. The total trade volume was around $8 billion. So which is less than half of India-Bangladesh trade, and even lesser than India-Nepal trade. When I was going through the trade data of Canada, it's very startling. Canada barely has much to trade with the outside world. It exports 76% of its export goods are directed to USA. 54% of its imports are from US and Mexico. Do you think that here is a case where lack of trade integration and FDI also, if you look at FDI, Canada contributed only 0.85% of India, the $58 billion FDI that India received in 2021. So it's minuscule. Do you think that lack of trade relations or with the outside world is a reason, or gives Canada or the Canadian government adequate reason for such reckless behavior?
See, I would like to, before coming to your question, I would like to point out certain things. $12 billion or $11 billion, really speaking, this year is not a bad figure. Okay, this year our trade achievements have not been much. And really speaking, considering the European recession, things are not looking very bright. That is one aspect. So let's not ignore a 12 billion as an insignificant amount.
We're not ignoring. We are only saying that given the potential, it's an energy exporter.
Exactly.
And we are an energy buyer.
Important thing, very, very important thing is that actually when you have a natural affinity and natural movement towards the NAFTA countries, North American Free Trade Organization or Free Trade Authority, then naturally your goods and services tend to go to those countries which pay more, which has a larger market, which is economically more competitive, etc. Now, what could have changed this situation in India's favor could have been the FTA, Indo-Canadian Free Trade Agreement, which was being discussed. In fact, there were maybe about 10 rounds or something which had been held.
It was making very slow progress also.
Okay. It was making slow progress, but to overcome that issues, because there were a lot of underlying issues there, so they decided to go sector by sector also. Now, that was very interesting thing. Like the UK Free Trade Agreement, it's a comprehensive agreement we're talking about. Okay. So they were saying here we will do incremental and subsequently we'll go to a comprehensive. Now, actually, an FTA would have given a lot of things, or FTA could have given access to Indian products to their market and their product to Indian market. Okay, unfortunately, what is of a long-term impact is the FTA negotiation has been called off. Okay, now once a FTA negotiation is called off, two important things happen. Number one is the trade or potential of trade or potential of growth of trade suffers. That is one important thing, because the tariff rules or the quota rules or the preferential partnership agreements, etc., which would have you had through an FTA agreement, does not happen. The other very important thing is that the tract or the bilateral investment treaties, which are increasingly important. One point of time, there used to be bilateral investment treaties, which we had signed with everyone. Subsequently, very rightfully, India government has decided to review all the bilateral investment treaties. And today, actually, the bilateral investment treaties are in most cases being renegotiated and redone. Now, bilateral investment treaty, there is one part of investment is coming from the FPI market. That is a foreign portfolio investment. The other thing is coming from the foreign direct investment. If you're talking in terms of foreign direct investment and investment of Canadian capital in India, then what is important is the bilateral investment agreement. Similarly, if Indian companies want to go there to explore and exploit the natural energy resources available in Canada, then also you require a bilateral bilateral investment. In fact, you would have noticed that immediately after the G20, the first action which came was not the speech of the Canadian Prime Minister and the Parliament, but a calling off of the FTA. And the day the FTA, Indo-Canadian FTA was called off, I felt bad and afraid, or rather it was quite an ominous development for long-term economic cooperation between the two countries, primarily because it has cut off any probable growth potential and diversification potential of trade, both services and exports, services and goods, and also investments, primarily because the BIT has been a bilateral investment treaty and bilateral investment pact has been affected. Now, if you look at Indian software sector or entire Indian computer services sector, if I may call it, or electronic sector, if I may call it, which is perhaps a very important part of our service exports. With Europe going into recession, Canada is a market which we're being looked forward to because of by all these countries, all these companies. Now, there actually an important thing is an FTA could have perhaps helped them make inroads there. See, when you are talking in terms of servicing IT services to Canada, you are essentially talking in terms of competing against the real biggies. That is the North American or European, US companies. Okay, it could be the Ciscos of the world, it could be the Microsofts of the world, and so many others. You are talking in terms of competing, or you are talking in terms of having an interaction with them in Canada. Now, for that, you require, it would have been good if you would have had some potential, some freeway. Now, that is one part of the question. The other part is, so far as what Canada has done in terms of support to Indian diaspora and perhaps a negative support or a negative way of handling diaspora is an extremely serious matter. And I leave it at this because primarily I am not the best judge. Professor Datta is a better judge in that. Okay. But essentially, all that I am saying is, politics apart, the importance of the economy, the issue needs to be settled right away, primarily because once you have a negative perception growing, just as Madam said, that a negative perception in terms of negative interaction with the student community there is causing fear. So similarly, negative perception and fear psychosis, if it develops in trade and investment relations, and we become uncertain of the future, then perhaps investments would slow down. As Mr. Moitra was telling, important thing is that yes, India is a very stable country. So when their funds look out for investment, long-term investment, India is a natural choice, yes. But if you are not sure of the policy development there, the stability essentially gets affected.
So we are coming back,
Stability,
right? So we are,
stability essentially is 2 points. One is political stability, and one is policy, political economic stability, and the other is policy stability.
so
Now
so
that
we are
is where actually
getting back to the same position that here is a case, here is a very interesting case. Let us look at it from Canada's side, that when the entire world is taking interest in Indian economy, Canada has detached itself from the Indian economy. So, it's as kind of a, and that is also, of course, not beneficial for us. This is, I believe, you're trying to pinpoint. Mr. Moitra, given the situation, the FPI investment, the pension fund investment, do you think that there is an imminent possibility of pullout? If so, in
This is
which
what
category? And because I don't really expect the pension funds to pull out at least.
exactly, yeah. So I think
Second is, if assuming that they pull out, let us think of a worst case scenario. What will be the impact on the market? Because I'm saying this with respect to what happened last year or so, when the US funds were pulling out of India and going to US for as the Fed was increasing the rate. What do you say?
no, actually, see, I believe that the good sense will prevail. This thing is not going to happen. Now, on the FPI investment, basically the share market investment, that's a very short-term impact. There's pullout, which you are saying is basically the US funds getting out for different reasons
And
altogether.
it is the seventh
That's,
largest FPI destination. It's not the top
yeah,
one.
yes. So basically, that's of course that is the implication. Share market falls, it affects the overall economy, the sentiment, the investors, everything is fine. Or the capacity of the or the capability of the companies to raise money all gets infected. But that's a very temporary kind of. Ultimately, it gets replenished. Considering the Indian economy such resilient and it's a large economy, growing economy, so I don't find much. But if you tell me that whether the pension funds, the large pension fund, the large FDIs which are invested in the infrastructure, whether it's a Brookfield or Canada Pension or CPPIVs or those kind of guys or CDPQs, so that has an impact. But I think it's not. I don't look. It doesn't look to be that those kind of pullout will happen in a very in such a manner, because those are actually those investment in real infrastructure. So pulling out is also not easy. Somebody has to make huge losses and pull out, and I don't think anybody will be mad enough to do that. I'm saying the worst scenario. But having said that, if that happens, it will be very bad for both of us, no doubt about it. And I don't think it's going to happen in that way. I still believe, of course, Professor Datta is a much expert. I mean, she has much more experience in the particular thing. I think it's a very short-term kind of phenomena, and this is just things have hotted up, and we need to cool it down, and so that these things doesn't happen. And I only if it happens, it may affect the share market. It is already affecting the share market, of course, for different reasons. But there is a sentimental reason for that. That there's a problem with one of the large investors, group of investors in the economy. So some effect has come into that, but it's very minor, and I don't think it's going to go beyond that. And we also should all pray, and also should, and government should ensure that this doesn't go bad. Good senses will prevail. I'm surefy that, because as I started with that, both are democratic, large democracies at the end of the day. Secondly, this may be issue with a group of people in that particular country, not with the overall the political diaspora of the Canada. If I'm getting the reactions right, and similarly in our country also, I'm sure we can work with the people there. Maybe one or two guys we may have some issues. So that's what I believe, and it should not happen in future. And so but only thing we have to cool down as fast as possible. That's what a very important part of it.
So I also share your views that it's not, and it's a developed economy. So just as we are talking about freedom of speech, so they have a freedom of investment. So they're not going
So
to.
yeah, exactly. Had it been certain countries which is an autocratic country, I could understand that it would have been continued for a long time. But I'm sure there are oppositions, there are people who think differently, and they all have a space into that. there is a law of the country, law of the land. So those things will also work into that and not be allowed. There are a lot of other issues happening in that country also. So I don't think they will also like another such kind of problem suddenly, coming into their economy and affect it much more. As I see, even otherwise also there's some more economic issues are going on in that Canada in the last couple of months. Lots of, yeah. So I don't think, I think overall that country,
just as we are concerned about our market, they should also be concerned about their market.
They should also be concerned about their market, and they already have some issues there. They'll not like it to be aggravated, I believe.
There are some, you see, it is a very critical issue, from which I don't think Canada is just Canada. Canada is about the Western Bloc, about US. So that is what is the leveraging point of Canada, the government in Ottawa. At the same time, these countries haven't, they haven't sided with Canada, but they haven't distanced either, which is understandable. Now that they haven't sided with Canada is a huge plus for the Indian side. One, it is naturally, since there are votes are involved. So even the opposition party has not outrightly opposed Mr. Trudeau. Whether we have to find a common rule to decide that who should be repatriated and who should not be.
I completely agree with the previous speakers, especially Mr. Moitra, that this is a political spat with very severe social ramification, of course, which is unfolding as we speak. But I think there's maturity on both sides of the democracies, and they would be. I'm sure interlocutors are already in place, and the conversation has to be addressed. I mean, and again, as you just mentioned, the international response has been also very matured. They've not taken anybody's side. They've said, yes, we are looking at evidences and instances. So it's a good mature response. It's not as if somebody is trying to
apparent efforts to cool it down.
Yeah, exactly. Nobody is saying that you're the hero by doing this, or you are the villain here. So nobody's doing that. That's very good. And I'm totally convinced that Prime Minister Trudeau and Prime Minister Modi both are very able, competent leaders, and they will know how to bring this down, because the whole thing going into a spin ball is bad for both. Canada can't afford it, as we've understood. It's compounding their own issues. We have plenty to deal with ourselves, but again, India will not take this lying down, but India needs to address this, but I think in a moderate, tempers at bay, and how to. It's an ongoing problem. It's not as if it's just the one-off time. So this is something.
We have a case of Kanishka,
yes,
Bombay,
and so in future we need to also address this. It's not as if it's with this we can resolve it. So as you're saying, they're citing rule of law, but India's very totally right on its rule of law. Others have called India the most ethical player, so obviously India also follows rule of law. So you're saying very correctly that we need to have a proper definition place. As you know, in international relations we still don't know what a terrorist definition, we keep squabbling, but there has to be some kind of a understanding here, and I'm totally convinced that both Canada and India will be able to there's been heightened moments just now, but they'll be able to bring it under a certain temperature again.
Thank you. So let's end it at this note that India and Canada will resolve it sooner than later.
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.